Hello, everybody. This is Carol Maletta. Welcome to the Parenting 411 podcast, where we share information parents need from sources they can trust. Hello there. You're in the right place today for a conversation we simply must have. We're going to talk about manners. In a world that seems to value efficiency and speed above all else, the art of civility and good manners appears to be waning. Perhaps the increasing reliance on electronic communication has played a part, but there also seems to be a cultural shift in what we prioritize when we interact with each other. However, at the end of the day, we're all still humans who must connect and treat each other with respect and consideration, essential building blocks for positive relationships. Now, that's why I have invited Mr. Donald James to join us. Aside from becoming a powerful, sought-after advocate for the importance of manners as we know him today, Mr. James is a retired NASA engineer and former associate administrator for education. During his 35-year career at NASA, he held various positions of increasing responsibility and played a key role in several major projects, including the development of NASA's Orion spacecraft. He is also author of the award-winning Manners Will Take You Where Brains and Money Won't: Lessons from 35 Years at NASA and Momma's Wisdom, which draws on his experience at NASA and his mother's wisdom to help students and early career professionals succeed in their endeavors. Together, we're going to delve into the timeless principles of courtesy and explore how we can apply them in our modern world and pass these priceless principles along to our children. So sit back, relax, and join us as we consider the power of manners to bring people together. So welcome, Mr. Donald James. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic, Ms. Maletta. Thank you so much. And I'm just honored to have this conversation with you today.
All right. First of all, is it okay if I call you Donald, or you prefer Mr. Donald James?
Donald is just great. I appreciate it. People ask me that a lot. And, I feel like we've gotten to know each other, and out of mutual respect, we can use our given names of our first names. I think that's just great. And that's kind of an interesting question, right? Because sometimes we don't know when we meet new people, and sometimes it's just a judgment call. But I appreciate your asking, and thank you for that.
Sure. So, how did you become interested in teaching people about manners? It's obvious that your mother poured those skills into you, but what made you say, I'm this NASA engineer and I've done all of this other stuff, but I think I need to talk about manners. How did that come about?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey that started right after I retired from the space agency. I was invited to come back to speak to that summer's cohort of NASA interns. And at the end of the talk, this young man asked me the really great question. He said, "Well, you were an intern, so if you can go back in time to when you were just starting off, just like we are, but knowing what you know now, how would you advise your younger self?" And I thanked him for the question, and I said, I have to tell you the truth. I would tell younger Donald to heed the advice that our mother had always taught my brother and me, and that is, which is the title of the book, Manners Will Take You Where Brains and Money Won't. And what my mother told us was, it doesn't matter how smart you are, it doesn't matter how rich you are, if you don't have good manners, you could have a problem in life. And we know this because we know there are people who are wealthy who are not happy. They have bad marriages, and there's a lot of smart people in prison, right? And so we know that being smart isn't good enough. We know that there are people who are rich, and they're not doing really well. And not to say that everybody like that, but there's another component to it. And so that was when the seed was planted that I felt like I wanted to share this, but the idea of writing a book about it didn't come about until 2 months after that talk. My mother unexpectedly passed away. She
Sorry
was
to hear that.
88 years old, but she had been in great health. In fact, she was out to dinner with one of her girlfriends the night before, but
Mm,
sadly, she went to bed and didn't wake up. Which, by the way, she ordained. She actually told us, I just want to go to bed and not wake up one day. I don't want to have this drawn out illness or anything like that. So my mom was a pretty powerful lady.
mhm,
So after that, in trying to imagine how to honor my mother, I was reflecting on the answer I gave that young man and felt that I wanted to write a book about this. So the book is really a longer answer to his question. And
okay.
it's for students, it's for early career professionals, it's for parents, it's for anybody that would like to explore this notion of manners and how important it is in our
Mhm,
relationships and in our careers. And that's how it began.
mhm, mhm. And how would you say that good manners have served you well in your career at NASA?
Well, I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but there were a couple of times in my career where I exercised poor judgment. Judgment is important, and on occasion I exercised poor judgment, and on a couple of occasions, at least one in particular, I was very nervous that maybe I was going to lose my job or get exiled. And what it was is that I had said something publicly that I should not have said,
Mhm.
and the director of the center was not happy at all with that. And he called me into his office immediately, and he was red faced and fuming. And so here's what I think about that. I didn't lose my job. In fact, I went on to become one of the highest ranking people in the space agency. It turned out that his deputy is somebody that I have known for a long time, and he knew who I was as an individual. And I think that my deputy secretly told the director that this is not characteristic of Donald,
Mhm.
and he made a mistake. I also attribute how I engaged the director while he was upset, and first of all, I listened I was very, my body was facing directly. I listened to him while he went off. And this is sort of a tip. If your boss is mad at you and is yelling at you, and he was yelling, don't interrupt because you're going to be roadkill. So I waited till he was completely finished with his tirade. And in a very measured, respectful tone, I looked him right in the eye and I said, Sir, I'm terribly sorry for my lapse of judgment on this. And I paused for a minute. And then I said, tell me how I can make this right.
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, after that question, our whole exchange, the tone shifted to the point that at the time we were finished, he shook my hand. He said, we're good. And that was it. Now, there's a third factor that I think helped me in this particular case, and that is my manners preceded that act. So
Mhm.
people knew who I was. They knew my character. They knew my heart. They knew that what it is that I chose to reveal was not out of malice. It was carelessness, is what it was. And I learned my lesson for that. Carelessness in a way that I didn't expect what had happened, and the details are not that important. But the point is, I shouldn't have done what I did. And
Mhm.
so this is really, I think, the heart of the message is that if you have a track record of impeccable manners on many
Mhm.
fronts, and we can talk about what manners means to me as I see it, then if you flub up like I did, and it becomes, well, that's uncharacteristic of Donald, then people, I think, are likely to forgive you or give you a little lenience. If you were the opposite of that, if you were a scoundrel and had a track record of doing, then this might have been the straw that broke the camel's back, and you might find yourself exiled to some massive facility nobody ever heard of, and that's happened, right? So it's your history, it's your track record.
Yep.
And so I think that's how it served me in terms of addressing a negative thing. And on a positive side, I really do believe that it allowed me, it, 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 it allowed people, bosses and peers and colleagues to want to help me.
Hmm.
It,
Hmm.
they wanted to find reasons to help me, and when I wanted to move up, they were supportive of that, because see, people don't want to support somebody if they're fearful that they're going to turn out to be a knucklehead or a scoundrel.
Hmm.
They're if they have bad manners, well, I don't want to promote that person, because then it's on me as
Right.
somebody who makes a recommendation. It's my reputation, right? So I gave them reasons to help me, not reasons to not help me. And I
Right.
really believe that's what helped me in my career, both negatively and positively. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you would talk about that because that's something that weighed heavily on my mind when my twin sons were younger. They are now young adults, recent college graduates last year. And
Right.
when they were younger, though, I really thought about that. I had one child who had some developmental delays, and at 2 and 3 years old, you don't know what that might look like later. And so
Yeah.
it was very important for me for them to be strong communicators,
Yeah.
um, and being able to get their thoughts out, whatever their concerns were, whatever their questions were, and to do it in a respectful way, because that's what I said. I said, nobody wants to help. Nobody will want to help if he doesn't have good behavior, or really, honestly, if either of them had poor behavior, then people aren't going to want to help them. And I have seen times in their lives when it has made a difference. Uh,
Yes.
Definitely
Yes.
has made a difference. And then that phenomenon of people wanting to help you. They're rooting for
Yes.
you because of the manner in which you've carried yourself. It precedes you into many situations. We'll be right back after this. You love your kids. You do your very best for them. But sometimes it feels like it's just not enough. And you're so sure you're the only one who feels this way. The truth is, you're not alone. It is also true that there are some things you're doing quite right. And there's a community who would love to exchange ideas with you. I'm Carol Maletta, creator of the Parenting 411, a portal for parents where I share information parents need through webinars and masterclasses. And not only that, the parents there support each other on this amazing journey in the Parenting 411 community group on Facebook. I can't wait to meet you in the community. And we're back with the Parenting 411.
I think competence and talent will take you only so far. I
Mhm.
mean, we've seen examples of, I think, even professional athletes and people who are clearly talented and probably making money for their team, but their behavior gets to be so egregious that they have to part ways, or they have to do something about it because it's hurting their brand and it's not appearing well. And so it's a tough thing, because where do you draw the line between your own sense of self agency about who you are as an individual, and this is authentic me and all that stuff. And I'm just asking people just to pay attention to see what's working and not working. That's
Mhm.
really what the invitation is. I'm not so much black and white about, well, this is the right way to do things and this is the wrong way to do things. I think there's a lot of gray area, but I think you have to pay attention to how you're showing up in the world and how
Mhm.
it's impacting your relationships, and asking yourself, if you're not getting the promotion, if you're not getting asked to the dance, if you're
Yes.
not getting opportunities presented to you, maybe you need to look in the mirror to see what it is about you. And it can include a lot of things. It can include how you dress, it can include how you speak, it includes how you listen, it includes, are you a taker or are you a giver? Are you always going to somebody saying, I need this, or I want this, or can you help me, or how do I get a promotion, or how do I get a bonus? And then ask yourself, well, how much have you given unconditionally to your
Mhm.
peers, to your
Mhm.
boss, to your organization, where the ask later become, oh God, I'd be happy to help you out because you're always giving,
Right.
right? So
Mhm.
so that's important, I think, to help train our children about what is it that's going to inspire somebody to want to help you, and
Hmm.
just ask if your attitude or how you show up, if you think that's really going to work for you, because if it's not working for you, maybe you need to take a deeper look at what's going on.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what you think the term good manners means. What does it look like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we all have manners, whether it's good, bad, right, or wrong, and all of that. We have a manner, right? We have a manner of how we talk. We
Hmm.
have a manner of how we hold ourselves. We have even energetically. You've seen people with good karma and bad karma or whatever it is. And so I think that the question is not, do we have manners or not? The question is, what are they? Right. And the way I began to see it, based on a lot of reading and a lot of training that I've done, and the things that I also learned from my mom, is that manners is much more than what we typically think of manners as politeness or etiquette. Now, that plays an important role. I
Hmm.
still say please, I still say thank you, I still handwrite notes. I open doors for people, men or women, if they look like they need help, right? Sometimes I still stand up if I'm sitting down and a person approaches the table. I used to only do it with women, but now it's both, because I want to be respectful of the person coming to the table. Um, I think manners is the total way we as individuals show up
Hmm.
in the world and show up to the world. And there's a distinction. And the distinction is that it's not so much that I think I'm showing up great, right? Well, I said please and thank you. I did this and I did that, but then I don't appreciate how it is on the other end. Now, let me take this to a real extreme, which I talk about in the book, because this is a case where there's certain ways that I show up that I cannot help. I cannot help that I'm a 6'4" African American male.
Hmm.
That said, when I am being very mannerly and nice and all that, there are going to be some people, if I come into contact with them, particularly people who don't know me at all, who may react a certain way for whatever reason they're reacting. They clutch their purse a little tighter. They may take a different path on the walkway. I've seen all this happen. I've
Hmm.
watched it. I wish I could videotape it, because a lot of people don't believe it, but I've seen it happen. So now I have something about me with it, which is I cannot control my physical appearance,
Hmm.
that is causing somebody to behave in a certain way for whatever reasons they are. And I have, my different hypotheses about that. So I can be a choice about how I react to that, but the key is I can't be ignorant of that. I have to be aware that this is going to happen and notice, so that I can decide how I'm going to continue to show up in the world for whatever reason. Now, um, I know many of my female colleagues at NASA will often walk into a meeting and they're the only women in the meeting, particularly some of the engineering, because we've had a history where most of the engineers were males, particularly white males.
Hmm.
But that's changing significantly now. That is just not the case, particularly at NASA. But in the earlier years, and I've been around for a while, a lot of the women engineers, they were the only ones at the table. And sometimes, you know, the men would interact with them in a way to suggest that they know that they're a woman, right? So they're not like holding on to their wallets because they think she's going to steal something, but they might make comments. They might say things that are inappropriate. And I've actually heard this directly from them. I actually spoke to astronauts who talked about going on to the space station in the early days and how some of the astronaut males, joked with them, when they came on board the station. That really was not appropriate.
Hmm.
So it's really being aware of the total person,
Hmm.
of how you are, because it affects you. And I have a lot of examples of how that is, and it's subtle sometimes. So I've had people who were very polite, actually, but it felt so inauthentic to me that I was like, wow, is this what this guy is like at home? Because he was just being obsequious in his politeness. It happened to be a doorman at the airport, and I just thought, I bet that's not what he's like when he goes home. He was putting on an act called, well, I'm going to be very polite because that's how I was trained to be, and my company told me to be this way, and I felt like I wasn't connecting with the real person. So it could work in reverse too if you kind of overdo it. So the authenticness
Hmm.
is a key component of manners as I see it. So it's broad, right? It's everything about how you show up in the world is your manner, and that can impact your relationships. It can impact your career. It can impact a lot of things. Your
Hmm.
kids, you
Hmm.
know, yeah,
Sure.
right.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought authenticity into the equation. Yeah, that matters too. Let's talk about your book, and I definitely want you to talk about rocket
Okay.
science manners.
Okay. Rocket science matters. Well, where should we start? Where should we start?
Wherever you're comfortable, whatever you want to do.
Okay. Well, you know, the funny thing about writing a book about manners from a guy coming from NASA is that I know a lot of people are wondering, well, what does NASA have to do with manners and things of that nature? And
Hmm.
maybe at some point I'll write a book on what I call organizational manners. How does an organization show up in the world, and how does that affect people? Because I know I've been the beneficiary of good
Hmm.
and bad organizations from a manners perspective. Even my own agency.
Hmm.
I'll give you a quick example.
Sure.
Um, when the last job that I held as associate administrator for education was actually the second time that I applied for that job. I actually applied to it before when my predecessor had gotten the job, and I actually did not formally hear that I was not selected before a colleague at my NASA center had heard, because she worked in public affairs and they were working up a news release about the announcement. And
Hmm.
in fact, to this day, I do not have a document from NASA telling me that I did not get that job the first time.
Wow.
That's bad organizational manners. And
Sure.
actually, when I did go to headquarters, I talked to my now peer, the head of human resources, and I told her, I said, I could have written the letter myself. Dear Mr. James, we get a lot of qualified applicants for this job, and you're certainly one of them. But we had to pick one, and you weren't it. I could have done that myself. So anyway, I digress because I think an organization even like NASA can culturally work on its manners. Now, to, to tie a bow on NASA, to say for several years in a row, and it was true last year, NASA was voted the number one place in the federal government to work, the best place to
Hmm.
work. And
Okay.
there's a reason for that, and that is that we do work on our internal culture and all of that stuff. So, um,
It's good to hear.
so let me, yeah. So yeah, it's it's challenging, and the reason I joke about the rocket science about it, because we blow up a lot of rockets trying to get them to work. The reason that manners is challenging is that we all assume that we are the ones that are doing the right thing, and there's something wrong with somebody else. It's very hard to look inward and to be coached and to be have someone take a look at how we're showing up, because we don't want to say things that might offend people. So I remember many years ago, my dad, when I was a young teenager, told me that I had a big mouth because I talked too much. And my father, wasn't a huge disciplinarian person. My parents had divorced, and so we saw my father when on visits and travel. It was usually a lot of fun. But he told me that one time, and I didn't like it, but it stuck with me. And so the truth is, I do have a big mouth, but now I know better. And now I know how to manage my big mouth. And I also know something that I also learned from my father indirectly, which I'm not particularly proud of. My father was a diplomat, but he also was a charmer and a flirt. He was actually quite a womanizer. And later in life, we realized that was probably the reason that my parents divorced. So unfortunately, I learned some of those things. And so later in life, as I began to do a lot of personal development work, I realized that nature of mine, even though I thought I was being good natured, is not always appropriate, particularly in a professional environment. So that's the manners matter. And so the reason that it's hard is that I have to challenge myself to do something that I inherently want to do or want to be. And because it was more important for me to be respectful of the people that I'm with
Mhm.
than to just be Donald and hope that they kind of get it. Does that make
Mhm.
any sense? I mean, it is hard. It is hard, but it takes work, and I think it can be done.
Mhm. Mhm. And so so the rocket science matters. Um, that is kind of a theme that runs through the book, right?
A little bit. I mean, I probably joke about rocket science in the sense because it's a cliche about the difficulty of it is, and it is hard. I mean, trying to get a couple million-pound piece of hardware up into space and orbit is a very difficult thing. It's kind of like children, right? As parents,
Mhm.
I use the rocket metaphor a lot. We Most of the energy to get a rocket into orbit happens in the first 7 minutes. All the fuel and everything, all the heartache, where disasters are like that. And so that's kind of like it is rearing children, is that the hardest part is in the earlier years. And what we want is that we want to deliver our payload, our children, into orbit and have them stay there and not come crashing down to earth, i.e., come back to home because they don't got no job and they don't have any money, or whatever, right? We want as parents, we want to give our children the very best launch capability to get themselves set in orbit. And if they're fortunate, then they will fire their last thrusters to leave Earth's orbit and go conquer their star and their destiny. Now,
That's what I
I
call
don't want to
rocket science parenting.
rocket science parenting. That's right. That's right. And as I see it, our ability to train our children to have great manners is a part of the equation on how you launch your children. And I know I spent a lot of time thinking about that, I think indirectly with my own children.
Mhm.
And for me, it really comes down to it's not what you say to your kids, it's what you do, it's how you show up. I mean, we all have our cell phones, and if I'm sitting here on my cell phone and I'm talking, say, "Hey, son, how you doing? How was your day at school?" And I'm looking at my cell phone because I got some important text. What message does that send? The message is, what's on this phone is more important than you at this moment. Um,
Mhm.
there was a great story that I read where Michelle and Barack Obama was watching one of their girls at a soccer match, I think it was, and Michelle caught Barack looking at his BlackBerry, and a reporter photographed her swatting his hand, telling him to put it away. And I was thinking, wow, that was like quick and subtle, but she was like, pay attention to your daughter on the field, not on that phone. I'm thinking, well, your husband is the president of the United States. I mean, maybe the missiles are coming. He's got to
That's
do something.
right.
But she didn't care. She said, right now, you're a father, and your job
Mhm.
is to pay attention to your daughter. And I agree with that.
Yes, yes. So why don't we talk a little bit about your own journey as a parent and how you taught your children how to show up
Mhm.
well in the world?
Yeah. Mostly it was my being a role model. Unfortunately, my brother, who is also the co-author of my book, Dennis, we
Mhm.
came from the same mom and we share the same values with our manners. And like my mother, who exposed my brother and me to a lot of fine men as we were growing up, we wanted to expose our children to the same. So it was a combination of being conscious of how we were with our children, being respectful, uh, even though we had a role to play as parents,
Mhm.
as well as who we had, who was in our circles for our kids to observe and see. Now we weren't always perfect with that, and I'm sure we made mistakes, but we did things like have a rule that we didn't have our cell phones at the dinner table. Now, mind you, my kids are 30 and 27, and so they came of age as in the beginning and the dawn of the
Mhm.
cell phone mobile revolution. But by the time, they were teenagers, everybody had phones. And so we had to decide when it was appropriate for them to have a phone. So it was appropriate to have boundaries, in that
Mhm.
way. Um, I also kind of I don't maybe I did this as a trick, but I asked both of my kids to help me with the book, like reading manuscripts of it,
Oh.
just to see, because I wanted their perspective as young people. And I said, look, I'm targeting, part of my target audience are your peers. And so I
Mhm.
would like to know your thoughts. And they provided really great feedback, the terms that I would use and the phraseology and things like that. My son's wife, who's also an educator, did a great job too of providing a lot of great feedback. So I was kind of
Yeah.
hoping that by them reading the manuscript, they would see where I was coming from. But it's really about, you have to work on your own manners. That's the bottom line I would say to a parent. You want your children to have great manners, you work on your manners
Mhm.
and learn, and be willing to question what you think you're doing is right, because it may not necessarily be right. And
Sure.
there's a lot you can do with that. Yeah.
Mhm. What would you say is like your favorite part of the book? Or, is there a passage or maybe a particular anecdote that you shared? What's your favorite?
Well, I have to laugh because that's like saying what's my favorite child. I have two children. They're both very different, but I love them to death
Mhm.
equally.
Mhm.
I love a lot aspects of my book, and I actually reread several sections. But there is one section that comes to mind that I think encapsulates a lot, and I'd like to just read it for you if that's
Please
okay.
do.
Yeah.
Please do.
Um, so it's on page 38 in the book. It says, "Think more deeply about the question, who are you? How do you answer that question for yourself? How could you answer it in an interview? You're not just your name, your race, your religion, the number of Twitter followers you have, your GPA, or the number of times you made the honor roll. Don't just tell me, as one interviewee did, that you're a Christian. I mean, Martin Luther King and Adolf Hitler both said they were Christians. Can you show me your faith without using those terms? Show me the way your religion works through you and serves your purpose, and I trust for good. Terms will be heard differently by different people. I'm the first to admit that I have judged people based on the terms they use to describe themselves.
Mm.
It's unfair because I don't know all that goes on beneath those terms. The terms are the proverbial tip of the iceberg. It's what lies beneath that matters. That's what I want. I want the clothes, not the label."
I like that. I definitely like that.
We'll be right back after this.
As the saying goes, mother's work is never done, except when it really is. I'm talking about my new book, Mother's Work: Pearls of Wisdom and Gems from My Journey. I share my transformation from an outmanned, overwhelmed mom of twin boys to a parenting strategist and consultant, and being honored as DC Mother of the Year by American Mothers Incorporated. In Mother's Work, I tell you about the 7 guideposts that kept me anchored as I weathered the peaks and valleys of motherhood. Grab your copy at carolmaletta.com/motherswork.
And we're back with the Parenting 411.
That's introspective look is something that, we all should do from time to time.
Yes.
To be clear about who we are and who we want to be, and if that aligns with how we're showing up. I like that.
Yes.
I like that a lot.
Yes.
So in today's digital age, social media and technology have changed the way we communicate with each other. So how can parents help children navigate these new forms of communication while still teaching them what I guess we could call traditional manners?
Yeah. This is a tough one since it's new and it's evolving, and now we have even new things like Chat GPT and how that's all playing out in the world. Um, I think at the end of the day, and you said it well in the introduction about how we connect as people, and whether or not it's better to pick up the phone and call somebody or go pay them a visit
Mhm.
rather than sending them a text, and what that could mean to people. Um, that's why writing a thank you note means so much to people, and we told our children that expected them to do that, and they still do. Sometimes it's impossible to read their handwriting, but that's okay. What it says is, I am, instead of firing off a text which can take 10 seconds,
Uh-huh.
I made the effort to sit down, to handwrite my thoughts, put it in an envelope, seal it, address it, stamp it, and put it in the mailbox, which takes considerably longer. So
Mhm.
the amount of attention and time you put in your acknowledgement is more correlated to your sense of gratitude,
Mhm.
right? It's not just a quick thing. Um, and so I think as we get more involved in our communication devices, it's imperative to just be mindful of how are we connecting with people. I thought it was fascinating that I read at the Masters golf tournament. I'm not a golf person, but I read
Mhm.
about it. This recently concluded that they banned cell phones from the entire tournament. And there was a quote from a mother who had her children there. She said, "This was fantastic. I actually got to talk to my kids, and they had talked to me because we didn't have our phones, even though I caught myself rummaging for my phone, thinking I needed to remember something, and I realized that I had it locked into the locker."
Mhm.
And so it allows us, I think, a time be to not be at the mercy of our technology all the time,
Mhm.
but in control of our humanity. And so, I think the best way to demonstrate that is for parents to model that behavior. You can't tell your kids to not always be on their phone when you're on your phone all the time. And so they see that, even though their friends and their friends' parents might be doing the same thing too.
Mhm.
Um, it's a tough one because I don't think we did a perfect job with that. But um, I know both our kids do make time to do things with their mates without their cell phones,
Mhm.
and I think that's great. So, but to ask the question, and be, you know, tell stories, even if you're using your phone to tell a story to your kid, at least you're talking to them, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Absolutely. It needs to be interactive
Yeah, yeah.
engagement for sure. Um, so, what 5 tips do you have that you could share with parents to instill good manners in their children?
All right. Well, I have 5 tips. Tip number one: be a good role model and exhibit impeccable manners. That's tip one.
Got
Tip two: be a good role model and exhibit impeccable manners. Tip three: be a good role model and exhibit impeccable manners. You see where I'm going with this?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
you know, I I think the challenge is to be overly prescriptive about what a parent should do and not do is a little bit presumptuous on my part to say that I know better how you should be with your children and all of that. But my invitation is just to have the inquiry. So,
Mhm.
what does it mean for you to have impeccable manners? Right? I didn't say what I think it is. I mean, I have my views. For one, if I'm speaking to you, you're the only one that matters at the moment. I call it presence listening. It's what I
Mhm.
write about, presence listening. It's almost like how, you know, a therapist listens to a client, or a priest takes confession, or,
Mhm.
you know, you're at somebody's memorial service and you're really listening to, the bereaved family. It's a kind of listening where your whole body
Mm.
is really right with the person. So
Mhm.
can you do that with your children, right? And when I say listening, I mean listen to what they have to say
Mm-hmm.
and then say, you know, so you're telling me that you're sad about how school turned out today, and then let them talk. And then,
Mm-hmm.
they don't necessarily want or need a fix or
Mm-hmm.
an answer or, well, here's what you should do. They just want you to have empathy. They just want you
Right.
to empathize. So empathize with your children and empathize with what's happening with them. And sometimes the best solution is to not give them a solution. Let them
Mm-hmm.
figure it out. I learned this from my son once. He was in his 20s, and I was, giving him some fatherly advice about something. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, are you parenting me right now? And we both started laughing. I'm like, oh, son, sorry, And he even said to us one time, and I really appreciated when he said this. He said, you know, let me make my own mistakes. Trust me, I will learn from them. And he's absolutely right. Because as parents, we just want to put our arms around our kids and protect them from all these evils and things like that. And I still do to some degree. I send them articles and things that I hope that they read, but they have to synthesize their information. But the truth is, just like you or I, Carol, we learn most of what we learn from trial and error and our own mistakes. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the best thing to do is let your kid fall down and skin their knee, right? The story that my wife and I laugh about our son when he was like 3 years old. We were leaving a restaurant. It was cold and rainy, and we wanted to put his coat on. And he did not want to put his coat on, and he had this tantrum. I'm like, Brandon, you got to put your coat on. It's cold outside. And the car is like 10, 20 yards away. And we forced him to put his coat on, and he's screaming. I'm sure people in the parking lot thought we were totally abusing this kid. And way later, my wife and I said, why did we do that? So if he wants to be cold, let him be cold. He'll
Mm-hmm.
learn if he's too cold, and he'll say, I need a jacket on. And like, what were we were so worried that, like, what was he going to get, pneumonia or something? So anyway, so sometimes you got to just let them fall and then
Mm-hmm.
be there when they do fall,
Mm-hmm.
and just have empathy. Yeah.
Right. Right. So, what's next for you?
Well, right now, what's next is that I'm working on a workbook for the manners book. I felt that it's great to talk about the principles in the book,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope people do some of the things that I suggest they do in certain cases. But I decided to wrap up a lot of things that I felt were important into a workbook for people actually to work on. And so it's a workbook, which means you have to work. This is not something you read through and say, "Oh, that's nice." You actually have an assignment you have to do, and then you have to reflect on that. And I feel that this is important for people to work on. So I finished the draft of it. I'm in the process of editing it now, and I hope to get it published later in the summer. So I'm excited about that. And
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, I've been doing lots of speaking engagements. I'm going to talk to the senior class at the high school soon. I'm doing a workshop in Chicago for a friend of mine's agency. I'm going to Idaho to speak to students as a keynote. And I love doing that. I love, sharing my thoughts. And I try really hard not to sound prescriptive and say, do this and don't do that. It's really an invitation for them to think about these principles in the context of their own lives and what works for them and doesn't work for them, and let them come to their own conclusions. And so that's what I'm working on.
Okay. And where can our listeners grab a copy of your book?
Sure. Well, they can find it at their local independent bookstore. Most of them probably won't have a copy of the book. They'll have to order it, but they can if you just tell them the name of the book. And of course, it's on Amazon. You can get the paperback, electronic book, or you can
Mm-hmm.
get it as an audio book, which I narrate myself. So it's on
Mm-hmm.
Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. Barnes and Nobles is still in business, and
Yes.
they have copies. I've seen them. So pretty much anywhere you can get a book, you can find it.
Okay. And if they would like to follow you, are you on social media or should they visit your website to learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, all of the above. My website is just my full name, Donald Gregory James. donaldgregoryjames.com, donaldgregoryjames.com, and you'll see about the book in there. There's a way of contacting me in the website, but I'm happy to. If people want to email me directly, I answer all emails. Manners will take you at gmail.com. Manners will take you at gmail.com. I appreciate feedback about the book and what resonates. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, so they can just look for me there. And I'm happy to have people follow what I'm doing and or reach out directly. I enjoy mentoring students and talking to parents, and this is my purpose now. Now that I'm no longer with the space agency. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that our listeners really got more than just manners being please and thank you, but a way of being, a way of treating people, a way of considering others, the needs of others in addition to your own, and sometimes before your own, really to make for positive interactions and healthy relationships. I certainly advise you to grab his book to really learn more, get into more of the details, but again, it's not just please and thank you and excuse me. There's a lot that goes into manners, and
There is.
right. And as he talked about, a manner of being, the way that you
Yes.
conduct yourself. And so I thank you again for spending this time with us. And so I want to remind you all, as we're coming up very close to Mother's Day, that you can grab a free book of free copy of my book, Mother's Work, Pearls of Wisdom and Gems from My Journey. And you just have to cover shipping and handling. Otherwise, it's free. But not only will you get the book, you will get a bonus webinar on communicating with your kids, along with the companion workbook entitled, Do You Hear Me? Staying Connected in the Chaos. You'll also get an ebook filled with inspirational stories about parenting in the pandemic and beyond. All you have to do is visit www.mothersworkthebook.com. That's mothersworkthebook.com. And I'm always happy to have you join me. Please follow me at the Parenting 411 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. By all means, like, subscribe, and share this podcast. We're also over on YouTube. If you'd like to see us having this conversation, you can visit the YouTube channel. This episode will be up in about 2 weeks. So if you want to hear it again, but you'd like to see us, that'd be wonderful. Head on over there. And I want you to remember that it's never too late to be the parent you want to be.